kind of lost me at data transfer. I don't know what's going on.
FTP, file transfer protocol.
Now, what we have to remember is that not every position can be changed to every other position.
And making sure that the users we have now stay happy and stay on while trying to attract some other people to play.
They make
Hustle
my
home,
head
but
for that.
yeah. No, that's over in a heartbeat. Ain't got any problem with that.
Hey, welcome to another This, That, and the Other. I'm your host, Magic, and hopefully we'll have some folks come join us. I know Shane was talking about coming on and discussing some of his recent success. Apparently he's won 5 national championships in the last 6 years, so definitely want to hear more about that. Today we're going to talk a little bit about rebuilds, primarily why people do it. It was one of the forum topics, and also talk a little bit about the fantasy football league that we have on Yahoo, and that's how we'll kick the show off. Just want to remind those players in that league, I think everybody but one has indicated they are returning, so that was a real good surprise for me to see. That's really nice. And our draft is on August the 28th, I believe. Let me not lie to you folks. Let me check just a second. Yep, the 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So that's going to be done live in the Yahoo Fantasy Football platform. It is a dynasty league, so the keepers have to be locked in here shortly, and we'll see how many players each team is keeping, which will have an effect on when those coaches actually get to make a draft pick, since the players they keep fill their first draft pick positions until they've exhausted all their keepers, at which point then they'll get to make a pick of whoever's available in the draft. So that's part of the strategy. And who you're going to keep, is it worth keeping those players or just letting them go back in the pool and be available for everybody? You may get a chance to pick them up if you do that. I've done that in a couple of leagues over the past couple of years, so that's worked quite well. But definitely looking forward to season 2 of this league, and going to keep folks updated for the most part on the message board in the GridIron Dynasty forum. Believe we do have one, maybe 2 people. I think it's just one that has not returned, so, or indicated he's returning, and that deadline is approaching shortly. So if you're wanting to get in on the league, by all means, keep an eye on that forum, because when that deadline passes, however many teams have not been renewed, that information for that team will be posted in the forum, so you'll know what the league settings are, as well as the team roster makeup. So you'll be able to get access to the team before the keeper deadline, so you can actually make those decisions for the team that you will then own. So hopefully everybody comes back, but if not, that's going to be an opportunity for some of the folks out there. All right, we're going to talk next about some rebuild stuff, but before we do that, we got Joe on with us. Many of you know him as Independent One or Wingman. So Joe, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for joining us, man. How you been doing as far as the wins go lately?
I've been doing okay, I guess. You know, it's funny that you're talking about rebuilds because I mentioned a while ago that I'm creating a tutorial video myself.
Right.
And basically what I have done is, or I'm still in the progress of doing, is I've taken over a mid-major program, and I am going to take 5 full seasons, taking over a rebuild and taking it every aspect you can imagine, you know, commenting on all my decisions, on all my analysis and everything.
Cool.
Basically 5 full seasons. Now, of course, you know, I understand that, you know, coaches go, I'm pretty good, and there are a lot of coaches out there that are much better than me. But I think for new coaches, this will be a real help to basically the things that you look for when you're doing this and that and the other, I guess.
The other. Good play there.
And yeah, actually, I have one more season to go. with that rebuild, and then I'll be complete with the 5 years. And basically, the goal is to take one of the worst mid-major programs over and then turn it into a seriously competitive team. And so far, I've done that, and I've got one more season to go. And then I'll be posting that. I don't know exactly when, but maybe in the next month or so.
My problem with that is I've done that in the past as far as the rebuild, not the chronological information that goes along with it. But I've done the rebuild, but then for some reason, I don't know what it is, my patience or just get bored or what. But, it's like it seems like year 4, year 5, I'm like moving on to something else. And then I look back, and as I've mentioned in the previous episode, they do better after I leave. It gives me a complex.
Well, you built the program. It's usually takes 4 or 5 years for things to take off. There are some coaches that can take really bad teams over and in 2 or 3 seasons turn them into really, really good teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I can take a team over fairly quickly and make it competitive fairly quickly. But the goal is to make it basically a top 10 team. Right. And I'm getting close. One more season, I should know. And and of course, every world is a little bit different. Some worlds are more competitive than others, and there's some luck involved. So I think it'll be an informative video for new people who are coming into the system to see, basically what you do and how complex the game is. And I actually enjoy doing rebuilds, to be honest. Of course, you take a hit the first couple seasons as far as your record is concerned.
Sure, yeah.
But it's a challenge, and I kind of enjoy doing that.
Yeah, that's, having the newbies come in and look at something like that, especially if they're going from a D3 team to a D2 team, and their success at D3 wasn't really all that good. And it's been a while since I transferred from that level to D2. So I don't know just how much of a selection is available if you've got a mediocre record at D3 as far as the open D2s go. And, if that is a factor, then they might not get the best D2 team that they want. And now they're stuck with an unintentional real rebuild, so to speak. So your effort will help them quite a bit in that avenue.
Actually, I do go over the program selection process. And in fact, I started before I had the team. Mm-hmm. When I had the previous team, basically I had a Division I AA team, and I moved up into a Division 1A team, and I went through the job selection process. I went through my criteria. Of course, everyone has their own criteria, but I went through my criteria on what I look for in a team I want to take over, and what things and what pitfalls you should try to avoid.
Right.
For instance, you take over a team where the previous coach had abandoned the team for a couple seasons. The players that are going to be on the team are going to be walk-ons.
Yeah.
You want to avoid that.
Yep.
Sometimes you might want, of course, people select teams based on sentimental reasons or whatever. And
sure.
No matter what, they want their alma mater, and that's fine. But literally I take it from the job selection process, and it will culminate with the playoffs season 5. And I'm, this past season, I made it to the second round of the playoffs, ranked number 11th in the country. And I'm hoping next season to make top 10, maybe third round of the playoffs. And I think that's pretty good for 5 seasons with a mid-major program.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in that D1A where it's so competitive. It's a little easier to do it at D2 with a fairly wide open D2 where you've got a lot of territory and, 20, maybe 25 human coaches, plenty of recruits to go around, so to speak. But, you were talking about taking over a team that had been abandoned. And that's one thing I tend to emphasize to newbies is when you see that an individual player, that rostered player is a sim AI, don't freak out right away. The only time to shy away from those sim AI players that are on the roster is if they joined that roster when the team was human coached. If that team was not human coached, those sim AI players that join the team when it is coached by a sim are usually pretty good. And I will say that they are going to be much better than some of the players a human coach can even see in his first year if that team is not upper echelon quality team. Because, sim AIs, they don't have a vision limit. They can see all the D2 recruits, D1 AA recruits, if that's where the team is. So they've got an ability to select without vision restrictions, where a new guy comes in and he's taken over that team. He may not see some of those players that the sim can see and even sign. So that's why, if you're looking at taking over a team that has been without a human coach for 3 or 4 years and is full of sim AI players, look at it real closely, because you may be surprised. You're going to find some quality studs in that roster that may benefit you that first year.
Well, absolutely. I mean, certainly you're not going to find a sim AI team stacked with talent, but you're going to find some solid players in there. You'll find some players that are very good. You look at it closely. And another thing is to look at the guest reports website.
Sure.
Look at the quality. You can see the quality of players on that website. So, like I said, you're not going to wind up with a blockbuster team, but you're going to wind up with some players that you can use to bridge the gap between when you've inherited all your players to where your players predominate the team. But you definitely don't want to take over a team where the last coach, didn't recruit the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, that's going to be a situation where you have very little, if any, quality players as sim AI recruits, because when it's a human coach team, you're not getting those quality sim AIs. You're getting the bottom of the barrel for the most part that your assistant coach signed that you regret having on your team, especially when it's a situation like I like to do where I only carry a punter or a kicker, and the sim AI is the situation I'm stuck with because I'm out of recruiting money and I've got 3 slots and my AC goes out there and, he recruits a punter and 2 kickers. I'm like, what the hell?
I'm going to be honest. And I always give away one secret on every one of the episodes I show up on.
Well, you need to show up more often then.
Yeah. I have all but given up on recruiting punters and kickers.
Yeah.
Literally, if I need a punter or a kicker, I leave an empty slot. And let's say I have 15 scholarships. I don't have a punter or a kicker. I recruit 14 players. And I leave 1 scholarship open, and I know this MAI is going to put a walk-on punter in there and a walk-on kicker in there. And it has been my experience that there isn't much difference between a walk-on punter and a walk-on kicker and just your average everyday punter kicker that you're going to recruit. So why in the world would I spend money on something that I can get for free? And if you're at a good enough team, they may give you a decent kicker or a decent punter, someone with high or very high potential, and for free. You don't even have to scout them. So that's
spend that money elsewhere.
Exactly. I mean, that's 15. At Division 1A, that's $15,000 extra that I get to devote to competing for other recruits.
Right. Yeah.
The only drawback that I can even think of regarding that is with the maybe field position you might get from kickoffs and punts. But otherwise, I have never seen a kicker miss an extra point. And right now, my elite Tennessee team has a walk-on kicker that has never missed a extra point. He's going into a senior season. He's got about a 97% field goal rate. Okay, now I don't try to kick field goals over 50 yards, but it's a walk on. So
Yeah.
and not only that, he's got very low potential too. So
Yeah.
I kind of took the hit on that, but he's performing fine. He hasn't held me back. I haven't really done an in-depth analysis of his kickoffs, but the team just seems to be moving along fine, with a walk-on kicker. So I don't see any reason why I need to recruit kickers or punters anymore.
The only drawback I can see would be from what's that term, strategery, the strategy aspect when it comes to recruiting is if I'm going up against a coach or we're in a battle and I can look at his roster and see that he took a sim AI the previous year, I know that his war chest is going to consist of the money from this year only for those recruits and any type of playoff money that he's got too. So you can kind of scheme your battles a little more effectively rather than going into it and you see a coach who's been there for 15 years without taking a sim that in the last 4 years that you can tell. And you're kind of, he may have a little more money than I give him credit for, so I may shy away from that battle.
Yeah, the war chest, that's something that I've never been able to do, to be honest. Maybe I am short-sighted, I guess, or whatever. And I tend to use, I may wind up with $50,000 at the end of a recruiting cycle. But I've never been able to carry over a balance where I'm trying to build a war chest over multiple seasons. It's just something. In fact, I created a spreadsheet to try to figure out, how much of a war chest can I build up based on how much, I guess you get 25% of what you have left over. And it's kind of eventually that 25% just decimates the war chest in my estimation. I could be wrong. But I've never seen the long-term benefit of trying to do that. Although I've been tempted to try it, I'm not a great recruiter, but I'm a good enough recruiter to where I'm competing against very tough teams for talent. So I've never been able to keep more than $50,000 any one season, and then by the next season that was all gone. So and of course, if you keep $50,000, that means you're only going to keep $12,500 of that.
Exactly. Yeah, and my philosophy is I'd rather spend that 50 on getting a better recruit this year than what that 12,000 is going to benefit me in the subsequent year. And it's one of those situations where in the years past, in the previous iterations of GD, when you could keep 50% of your carryover, that was something that was a tool that you could use to your benefit. But at 25%, that 12,500 at 25%, the next year it's down to $4,000 or $3,000 if you
exactly.
Yeah, it's just not worth it. I'd rather spend that money on a recruit. There's been times when I've had, let's say even D2, for instance, where I'm sitting there and I've got one open scholarship and I've got a bunch of guys green, any of which I could take with the scholarship offer, but I'm sitting there with $12,000. I'm looking elsewhere. I'm going to use that $12,000 to find somebody out there that's going to be better than what I've already got committed to me, rather than try to carry over, that $3,000 into the following season. It's just, I'd rather use that money now because hell, I may not be the coach there next year.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, the whole idea of having a war chest is for it to grow and for it to be substantial. And yeah, I've had Division 1A teams, and generally speaking, what I do is I have a big class. I rotate my classes. I have a big class, a small class, a big class, and a small class. And I try to have a lot of money for the big classes, of course. And I've considered, maybe at Division 1A, going for real cheap recruits one year and trying to keep $100,000 back. But when you think of, I'm foregoing, $100,000 this year to get $25,000 next year, it's just not a good equation, I don't think. Now, if they were to modify that to where you can only you take the 75% hit 1 year only, and let's say I get to keep that $25,000, and next year that $25,000 stays $25,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I take the 75% hit on this year. If I keep in excess of this year's recruiting money, then maybe that would be different. I could accumulate something, because the whole idea of a war chest is I'm going to sacrifice the short term so that 1 year I could show up with like $1 million. Mm-hmm. And that would be wonderful, where, suddenly you're coaching at Tulsa and you tell Nebraska, nope, you're not going to get that quarterback. And, and I'm sorry, Tulsa's getting the number one recruited, the best quarterback in the country this year. So that would be the benefit of having a war chest, but it's you need a lot of money for like a mid-major to be able to tell an elite that no, you're not going to have that recruit.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of the downfalls to the reality of this game is there are, regardless of how good of a coach you are or how good your team is, there are going to be some hurdles that in many cases at a mid-major you're not going to be able to jump, just because of the fact that you've got the elite, and especially if you're after a recruit and he's within both of your 360. Don't even bother, I mean, realistically. But that's one of the things that, is challenging sometimes. You can kind of put your foot out there and test the water, so to speak, and see. You may get lucky every once in a while because there may be a preferred player that particular elite has just a bit ahead of him, and you may walk away with a good one.
Actually, in the tutorial I've created, of course I go through recruiting, and the mid-major I'm coaching at the time right now is Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And in the recruiting process, in the player evaluation, I tell everyone, don't even bother with recruits that Oklahoma or Nebraska. If you can project that they're going to be interested in these recruits, don't even bother with them. Mm-hmm. Now you can watch those recruits, and maybe Oklahoma and Nebraska wants somebody 500 miles away in the other direction, and so you might be able to take their leftovers. Yeah. But if an elite program near a mid-major wants a player, don't even bother scouting the player. It's just a waste of money, and know your place in the world. And that's reality. Yeah, and there are some things you can mitigate your place in the world. There are some things you could do to maximize your efficiency, and you can beat coaches on other aspects of the game. But when it comes to recruiting, there is a tiered system, and you have to understand where you are in that tiered system. And every now and then you might get lucky, but otherwise, just deal with the fact that that person has more money, more prestige, and they can swat you aside as easy as lickety split or whatever you want to say. So
yeah, and that's one thing I try to tell guys that have questions about D1A recruiting. That D1A recruiting to me is like no other recruiting that we have in any of the other levels, simply because of the close proximity in the quality of recruits at D1A, the lower tier D1A recruits and your upper tier D1 AAs, that there's some blend over from those D1A schools and, being interested in some of those D1 AAs and having turned them green early on, if for no other reason than as backups. So I always preach, primarily three things. One, be patient. Don't spend all your money going after guys who are going to be mediocre or sub when you have the possibility of landing some of those upper level guys because the D1A schools that are on them now are going to fill their rosters. And now those guys are going to become available. And two, use Ed's tool to see some of that information, to actually look at who some of those upper crust D1 schools are after. For instance, you mentioned Oklahoma. Let's say that I'm a D1A school, Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and Oklahoma is, nosing around and has got a couple of guys green that are within my 180. Well, I don't know without looking if those are primary targets for them. So I can use Ed's tool to see that, hey, this guy is going after this quarterback, but he's like the 5th quality quarterback that is green for Oklahoma. So there's, very little chance that Oklahoma is actually going to sign this guy when they've got 4 quarterbacks on their roster already and they're only getting 1. So that kind of information is good to have because you can use it as part of your decision-making process to decide, do I want to hold some scholarships in reserve, especially with a big class, to get some of these D1A drop-offs when they sign all their recruits. And third is don't be afraid to send a scout to some of those schools that are green for those other D1A schools, because when those schools drop off of them, you want to know then what their potential is instead of having them go undecided because Oklahoma filled all their scholarships. And now everybody in the world sees they're undecided. Now is when they're going to send them the scouting, the AC scout, to see what their potential is. Know that information ahead of time, and you have a lot more success at the D1 AA level.
Yes, and you can predict some coaches. I mean, everybody has everybody has their own method of recruiting, and no method is better than any other, because it depends on what works for you. And some coaches, and I won't mention any names, but I watch them very closely, and you can see from the roster that they sign 1 or 2 defensive backs a year, and they've got 5 defensive backs green. Or especially when it comes to recruiting linebackers or tight ends or running backs, because those positions tend to have a lot of undecideds at the beginning. Mm-hmm. There's one coach that I watch, and he'll turn 5 running backs green right at the outset of recruiting. And I know he's only going to sign one of them. And he's coaching at an elite school, so I know he's going to go after a great running back, and I know that 2 or 3 of those running backs are going to be available at a minimum, and they're pretty good. So I watch it. There are other schools that or other coaches are going to upgrade. It's especially watch some of these elite schools where they turn some players green early, and those initial greens are their backups. Right. And then you check them a day or 2 later, and they're going after like the number 1 linebacker or the number 1 defensive lineman. And that the reason they've already turned enough green, but they're going after it. And if you're willing to take a risk, sometimes what I'll do is I will put about $5,000 or $7,000 worth of visits into a player from an elite who's turned green for an elite. And even though that player hasn't turned yellow for me, I've got those visits in. Right. Yep. And the moment that recruit realizes that he is not in the plans of Notre Dame or whatever, I've got my foot in the door. Exactly. And in fact, I may even up the ante once I see that we've had a signing day happen, and this guy has already signed 3 defensive linemen, and he's only going to sign 3 defensive linemen, and this guy is not one of them. So, so you got to watch. You can learn. Now, of course, showing up, first couple seasons, you're not going to be able to know the behavior of the coaches you're competing against. But if you stick around for a while, you will learn their behavior. You will know who who will go for to upgrade their classes, and who turns 10 tight ends green. Okay, who's going to sign 10 tight ends? So you just pick out the second or third best one that he's going after, scout him, and you may even want to turn him green yourself right then. So,
Yeah.
So,
The other thing too that I mentioned is a lot of the times the guy that grades out better than the guy you're focusing on may be more appealing, because today, right here, right now, he grades out as a better player today. But then you've got to look at that potential. You've got to look at that work ethic, and you have to use your own formulas to make a decision of where is this guy going to be as a junior and senior versus where this guy is going to be as a junior and senior. Because realistically, that's when those guys are going to be important. That's when they're going to be starting on your roster. So you want to be wary of being suckered in by the eye candy of a guy who's 90, elusiveness and 64 speed and 50 strength at a D1A. You're like, he's not going to be all that good, but he's very high potential with a 72 work ethic. This guy's going to be really solid, really good toward the end of his sophomore year. So you're going to get 2 quality years out of this guy versus the guy that may be an 85, 75, 85 between strength and speed and elusiveness, but he's low potential with a 31 work ethic. You're looking at probably the best he's going to be. He won't grow but so much. And within a year or two, that guy who may not grade out better today may actually be the better player a couple years down the road.
Well, yes. And player evaluation is really huge. And add this to where, know where you are in the world. Know your place. Mm-hmm. In the example where you're going after Notre Dame's or Ohio State's or Penn State's leftovers, you think of a defensive lineman. Maybe this defensive lineman's got 78 overall score as a defensive lineman, and the reason Notre Dame is looking for to upgrade is because the guy has low potential. Mm-hmm. And he's looking for somebody with a 78 overall skill with high potential. Okay, so here I am at Tulsa. I'll take a 78 with low potential because this guy is going to be a 4-year starter for me. So yes, I don't have any problems taking Penn State's leftovers because if the Penn State coach is a good coach, which they usually are, and plus, if this guy is going to be a full-time 4-year starter, he's going to get every bit of that low potential. Mm-hmm. He's going to get enough playing time to kind of mitigate the fact that he's got low potential. So know where you are. Player evaluation is actually quite complex, but Tulsa will take an elite's leftovers any day of the week, and given the daily competition you have at Tulsa or another mid-major, you're going to do real well. Okay, now going up against Penn State, that's another story. Mm-hmm. Because they have the 78 defensive lineman with high potential. You got the 78 defensive lineman with low potential. So you might have to beat Penn State on using another method, maybe better game planning or better roster management or whatever. So or just getting flat out lucky. So
when it comes to recruiting, especially when you're doing a rebuild. Or maybe not necessarily a rebuild, but your first foray into, your career at a particular school, especially at D2, more so than D1 AA. I definitely think that if you're using the same recruiting strategy for your first 3 or 4 years, you're messing up because your recruiting strategy, and again, we're not talking cream of the crop team that you just took over with Max Vision. We're talking mid-level team that's got some vision improvement in their future. Your first year, like you said, should be to hell with potential. And I'm looking for core values right now. I'm looking for guys that can do something for this team immediately, get me wins year one. And then your second year, you should still keep that in mind, but now start tailoring your team a little bit more for the future and looking for those, few 2 or 3 guys with potential or high work ethic that may not start for you this year, but they'll be backups in a year or two and maybe starting for you in your senior year with him on the roster. And then about time 3 or 4 year, your third or fourth season, that's when you really want to start looking at those guys that are your future players. Because now, the guys that you'd recruited that first year, they're juniors now, and they're probably maxed out, and they're still going to win you some games. So your vision should be improving. So now you should be looking at some better quality players so you can be a little more precise and a little pickier and hold out for some of those guys that give you that future value versus the value for today. Because remember, in about 6 years, if everything goes right, you're going to have a continual playoff appearance, and you're going to start making those deep playoff runs. So that vision, that third, fourth, fifth, sixth year, it's just going to keep growing and growing to where you're going to see more of the type players that are going to win you a lot more ball games.
Yeah, actually, I kind of equate taking over a team, a rebuild, as the first year is basically crisis management. You're basically restoring order where there is no order, and you're trying to plug holes. Mm-hmm. And you're offering playing time to everybody, and because you're offering playing time to everybody, and playing time that will help players develop a great deal. So you can sacrifice potential because you're going to give people lots and lots of playing time. So in the first, and plus, I tend to try to give a lot of playing time to everybody anyways. But first year of a rebuild, even the second year of a rebuild, that's going to be exaggerated. You're giving them even more playing time. Yeah. Even under normal circumstances, I'll give freshmen between 25 and 40% playing time every, just about. There might be 1 or 2 that, that are projects. And you tend to take projects because recruiting is a competitive process and you don't wind up winning all the recruits you want. And another thing is when the potential ratings that we see, the very high, the average, the low, and the very low. We have to understand that you've got 5 ratings, but they're really about 10 ratings that you can't see. Exactly. And so I recently signed a quarterback at Division 1A that some of the numbers don't look good, but he's got a 4.0 GPA. He's got high work ethic, and he's got average potential, but his average potential is actually kind of close to high potential because the scouting report said he's got lots of room to grow or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes you may have an average recruit who's actually high in potential or borderline high. And vice versa, you may have a recruit who has a high, the blue H, where he's at the low end of that, where he's closer to average than high. So the 5 categories, very high, average, low, and very low, doesn't really completely explain potential. And sometimes, average, and sometimes recruits with low potential are kind of close to being average in potential. So you just don't like to see that L or that that VL. And I'm like everyone else. I try to avoid very low potential players unless it's I'm facing a catastrophe. Yeah, exactly. unless somebody has raided me or something and flipped 2 or 3 recruits and I don't have any money or whatever. And I'd rather take that person than a walk-on. But even with playing time, some of those players could turn out to be okay. So,
yeah. And, I equate it to the bucket analogy of like, let's take average, for instance. You throw all your average guys in the bucket, there's going to be that layer at the top of that bucket that are your upper echelon average guy. And then the middle second, or the middle tier is the second group, which is your, he's not going to improve all that much, but he's not bad either. And at the bottom of that, you've got he's tapped out, and, you can forget it. What you're looking at is what you're going to see, when he's a senior. He's maxed out pretty much. So like you said, within that category, there are sub tiers, if you will. And it's important to understand that because, like you said, you could have let's say you've got a low sub-tier average player. So he's average, that's his black A, and his scouting report comes back and says, yeah, this guy is, pretty much, tapped out, and you've got his core values. But even so, he's got a high work ethic. So, if he grows any, he's going to do it immediately, so to speak. And then you've got a low player who is at the upper echelon of that low, where he's got some room to improve, and he's got a high work ethic. In 3 years, his cores may be better than that average guy that was low. So, that potential is basically a guide or a starting point, indicating, where you can group that player. And then it's up to you as the coach to dig through those scouting emails and those responses to assess where within that potential level he actually, lives. And then, do your analysis regarding the work ethic and the opportunity for playing time, because work ethic will really grow with playing time, as you've mentioned. So, it's up to you to do a little bit of that math, do a little bit of that assessment, and really take advantage of the knowledge that you have with those scouting reports, whereas a lot of guys, they'll see that average and not even recruit the guy. And you can turn a high average guy into, a good quality high guy in a couple of years.
Yes, and you love that when you see coaches who use that, that basic criteria, and, will shy away from a so-called low potential recruit just because they don't like that L on their roster.
Exactly.
And every team has different needs, and every coach has a different player evaluation method. Mm-hmm. And some of these low potential recruits, may be exactly what you need. Maybe you might, the offense I use is a trips offense, and generally speaking, one running back is a starter. But occasionally I'll recruit an extra running back who is not going to be my prime running back, and his sole role is to come in the game when my prime running back is tired. That's his sole role. He's never going to be a starter, and so basically, I'm willing to accept someone with lower numbers or whatever, and I'm basically willing to take an extra player. He's basically an extra player on my roster, and I don't know what point I'm making here. Okay. But
there's no rhyme or reason to your roster setup from one coach to another, because those details are secret. So like you said, you may take an extra running back this year where 4 years prior you haven't. So, that's knowledge that only you have, that another coach may not understand your recruiting strategy and go, hey, he's only taken one running back the last 5 years. Why is he taking two this year? Well, that's because you've got the purpose of getting that guy in the game to rest your starter, And like, there's a primary example of that is there's a coach at D2 runs trips. And I was playing against him, and I looked at his roster, And at trips, I'm used to seeing a ton of wide receivers and like maybe 3 running backs. Like you said, you get a couple in there to rest the primary guy, whatever. And, after he cleaned my clock, I went ahead and sight mailed him and said, hey, just out of curiosity, you're running trips. Why are you carrying 6 running backs? And he was kind enough to answer, and his point was very educational to me, something that I would never even thought of doing in trips. And he says, I carry three type of running backs: my blocker, my runner, and my receiver. And I try to carry 2 every other year. So, and, to groom them for the year. So as my running back is shoulders above my receiver, then I tend to run a little bit more out of trips. If my receiving running back is the year that his quality stands above my rushing running back, I tend to throw to him instead of running a little more that year. And my blocker, my fullback, is the one that I definitely rely on when I'm not throwing to a quality receiver, nor do I have a quality running back that can run the ball. So one year I'll throw strictly to wide receivers, mix in a running back every now and then. And then other years you may see that I'm running more, and in other years you may see that my running back is receiving the ball more. So realistically, he has 3 different offenses that he runs out of trips, just because of the variation in his running back makeup. And it's tough to argue with his rationale for that. He's successful with it.
Yeah, of course, everybody has what they do. And if you're successful at what you do, then good for you. Mm-hmm. You can't argue with someone who's successful with what they're doing. Now, I wouldn't have that many running backs in my trips offense. Basically, I try to have 4 at the most. 4, and one of those 4 would be redshirting that year. So I'd have 2 of them, 2 prime backs, 1 guy whose sole role is to come off the bench, and then maybe a redshirt guy who's going to replace the redshirt senior who's graduating next year.
Right. Yeah.
But my strategy, the way I play the game, is very, very dependent upon all my players getting substantial playing time. And with 6 running backs, I would be struggling to get, each of these running backs playing time. Yeah. So if it works for him, that's fine. I wouldn't do it. But, this may be one of the coaches that beats me all the time.
Yeah. There's different ways of getting it done. And to me, my first thought was, after I talked with him, was, why didn't he just try to find a running back that was fast and had hands? And I went back and looked at his roster, and then I went back and looked at the guest reports, and that's where I saw that 2 of the running backs on his roster started off as wide receivers. They were recruited as wide receivers. And one of the running backs was recruited as a tight end. So there was a conversion that took place, and that blocking running back was actually a tight end. So it's not so much that he is unable to find players who have the ability to run the ball and catch the ball. He's able to take the best of that specialty, the wide receiver, for instance, it's head and shoulder as a receiver above any running back. Even when you take a hit in a certain category, it's the same as to be said with the blocking back. You're going to be tough to find at D2 a running back that's got 60, 65, 70 blocking, and he's carrying around a 75, 80 strength. That's going to be tough to find. But there are tight ends out there like that, and the minimal hit you take on your blocking still makes for a better blocking running back than what's available out there as a running back. So, it blows my mind. I've been playing this game for going on 20 years, and it blows my mind the things that we learn and the different nuances, even though the game has, it's taken its changes, from the various versions. So of course you expect to learn some new things and get some new understandings. But, you know, we've been on this one for many years now, this version, and there are so many strategies, so many ways to structure a roster, so many ways to get your playing time, and so many different opportunities for you to actually put your thumbprint on the team and make it what you're comfortable with managing and recruiting and make it successful, that anybody who gives up just because they don't understand the game is really not giving the game a chance to come to them through trial and experimentation.
Well, yes, and that's that's a great part of this game, where there are 1,000 ways to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, unfortunately, because all we see is numbers. Now, in real life, obviously, if you're watching a football game, then you can see, yeah, that guy's not a real running back. He's a tight end. He's a former tight end.
Yeah.
You would know that.
Yeah.
But you're not going to look for that when you're looking at the numbers. So people are doing things to be successful, and we're trying to figure out, what the heck are you doing? What the heck are you, and you can't tell what they're doing unless they tell you.
Right.
And that's why people have secrets, and and I have secrets, and I don't know if my secrets are as good as somebody else's secrets. And occasionally people will give up their secrets, and then the light bulb will go off over our head. And that's one of the reasons why I love the game, because if I can try to figure something out and and try to analyze it and try to come up with a better option, that's what I love to do. Even if I can't actually do that, the actual exercise itself, the analysis, the competition, and giving kudos to somebody who comes up with an inventive way of winning. It's like, who would have thought of that? Just while you were talking, I was thinking maybe I need to focus my attention on maybe getting that, an extra running back that can block. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to, go the tight end route. But occasionally I do run some offenses that do have running involved. And sometimes you might have an offense where you have players in certain positions where they don't show up in the stats at all. And maybe you have, you're running trips and you really pass. That's the only thing you really do. And you don't run, and you've got good running backs, but they don't have any rushing stats at all. So you need to find a way to use that play or whatever.
Exactly.
It's tight ends in a trips, offense. If you're not passing to your tight end's going to wind up with no stats at all. So, so what kind of a tight end should you have? So these are great questions, and people come up with very creative solutions to these questions, and that's what makes the game great.
And I've even mentioned to a couple of guys, and I may have done it on the show, I'm not sure, but I know I've done it through site mail, is that just because you have the ability to have a team in 7 different worlds does not mean that each of those teams needs to be managed the same exact way, especially if you're having mid-level success where you're not making those deep playoff runs every year. That shows that there's something that can be done to improve. Use that opportunity of having different teams in different worlds to set each one of them up a little bit different. Sure, it's going to be a lot more work for you on the front end, but if you go ahead and set them up a little bit different and try different things and experiment in different veins with them, and then you can see or get a better understanding of what is working and what's not, so that eventually down the road, you can set up your teams in the manner that you have discovered through this trial and error and experimentation to be successful for you. And now you'll have an easier time across the board with all your teams getting deep playoff runs in those elusive national championships. So, there's a gentleman who, told me he was beating his head against the wall. He's got 3 or 4 teams, and no matter what he does, he can't make it out of the first round of the playoffs at D2. And looking at his teams, that's what I discovered, is they're all set up exactly the same way. And what that also does, and what I told him was, if I'm a coach in one of your other worlds and I'm playing against you, when I play against you in this other world, guess what? I don't have to scout. I already know what you're going to do because your teams are executing exactly the same way. And it just makes it easier for me to, focus on other things in game planning against you. Maybe looking at my offense a little bit more, whereas I didn't have the time if you were running a totally different offense. So, those are all little parts of the game that coaches can use to their advantage.
Yes, playing in multiple worlds, there are some things you can learn that are common to all worlds, like recruiting. I mean, you'll learn how to recruit. You'll learn that the interface and all the different things you can do to recruit. But the only way to learn how to the game plan and to use playbooks and use formations and use all these things together to create a strong team is to experiment.
Exactly.
And if you're in multiple worlds, experiment. You may build up an awful lot of experience recruiting, and some coaches rely very heavily on recruiting for their success, and you can be successful with that, but ultimately you want to learn the other aspects of the game as well.
You have to.
Yes, and also when someone plays in 6 or 7 or 8 worlds, very early for maybe a year or whatever. The record kind of gets inflated because they've played so many games, but their learning is stunted if they're not experimenting during that time.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to experiment, and also, like you said, sight mail people.
Yeah.
Usually, most coaches will have no problems, telling you whatever you're asking them. They're not going to give away the house or anything like that. But occasionally you might get lucky and they will give away the house. Most coaches have no problems, telling you what you're doing wrong. Just add that to your learning experience. There are people who are really good coaches. Pick out those coaches, and maybe you might be coaching in the same conference as they are. So if some of these really good coaches are coaching in a conference, go into that conference and form a relationship with that coach, and they'll be much more likely to tell you how to play the game.
Sure.
So,
yeah. But Joe, I appreciate you popping on with us today. Definitely enjoyed the conversation, and as always, a lot of good nuggets of wisdom and things that others can glean from the conversation to hopefully improve their team or a certain aspect or facet of how they manage their team, whether it's recruiting, game planning, or whatnot. So definitely, folks, reach out to Joe if you got any questions. I'm sure he won't mind. And, my site mail is out there, and it's always waiting to have an answer because I've got quite a few. So if you site mail me and don't get an answer today, I'm usually pretty good about getting back to you within a day or two. So always available and always here to help. Definitely. Well, this has been another great episode of This, That, and the Other. I'm your host, Magic, and join us next time. Thanks again, Joe.
thanks for having me.